10 years of Justin Trudeau, 10 years of crisis. From 2015 to 2025, Canada faced a brutal combination: a housing disaster, immigration strain, and inflation that spiraled out of control. Then came the breaking point. In January 2025, Trudeau resigned. By April, Canadians were at a crossroads and the country was desperate for a fresh start. While Canada doesn't technically run on a two-party system, all eyes were on two names: Pierre Poilievre of the Conservative Party and Mark Carney, the Liberal Party's new face and a seasoned economist with no political baggage. Poilievre had long been the favorite, until two forces changed everything: Carney and Donald Trump. Trump's push for US tariffs stirred economic anxiety across the border, and suddenly many Canadians believed that only an economist, rather than a career politician, could handle what was coming. So they placed their bets on Carney. But was that the right move, or a decision they'll come to regret? This is the story of how Canada just sealed its economic future. Mark Carney versus Pierre Poilievre. To analyze whether Canadians made the right or wrong choice, we must analyze what both of their options stood for. Canada today is facing a number of issues. All of them were addressed by both parties, and they shared different approaches to tackling them. Let's take a look at the problems one by one and analyze which of the solutions could have worked.
Putting them and saying the reason why you can't buy a home or you can't find a rental apartment that isn't under $2,500 a month.
Number 1. Housing crisis. Canada is facing the worst housing crisis in history. If you're interested, check out our previous video, Why Living in Canada is Impossible. Let's jump into the solutions proposed by both parties. Both Poilievre and Carney introduced some sales tax benefits. Carney had mentioned that he'd eliminate GST for first-time homebuyers purchasing properties worth less than $1 million. Poilievre announced that he'd eliminate GST for all homebuyers and would also increase the limit to $1.3 billion. While this benefit may seem good on paper, it doesn't really help people living in cities like Vancouver or Toronto, where the average house price is above $1 million. And besides, the average price for anything depends less on taxes and more on supply and demand. So if they want Canada to come out of this crisis, they must focus on building more homes. Carney, in his campaign, focused more on prefab homes, homes that are built off-site and then transported. They're cheaper and faster to build and can be placed over federal lands, which apparently Canada will never run out of. So what's the flip side? Well, it's true that Canada has a lot of empty federal land, most of which isn't in major cities. To overcome the housing crisis in major cities, you'll need apartment buildings or multiple family houses, and not prefab homes that do not help with densification. Poilievre, on the other hand, advocated a different approach. His strategy was to tie federal funding for municipalities to home construction. That is, every city would have a growth target of 15%. If they fail to reach it, they'll lose the money they were set to receive in federal funding. If they exceed it, they'll be rewarded. This approach may seem good, but it isn't likely to work. For one, bringing in incentives isn't enough to encourage cities like Vancouver or Toronto, which are not short on funding. There can be one good step, however, which was proposed by Poilievre, imposing fines against local oppositions for blocking home construction. On paper, this approach could help eliminate NIMBYism, but is it practically feasible? We don't think so. We've discussed approaches by both parties to increase home supply, but we would argue that there can be another approach to overcome the housing crisis: limiting demand. Most Canadians would argue that a major reason behind this housing crisis is uncontrolled immigration. Because of this, the immigration crisis became another deciding factor for Canadians during the election. Number 2. Immigration crisis. Immigrants are what made Canada, but now there might be too many of them. Mass immigration in Canada has led to a large number of protests in the country.
The signs that are at this protest: end corporate mass immigration. We do not consent to your rules. Take back Canada, end mass immigration. This is the message of this protest.
Realizing the sensitivity of the matter, both parties have proposed control over immigration. But how are they going to do it? Let's discuss. But before that, if you enjoy learning more about today's economic stories, be sure to subscribe. Starting with Carney. The Liberal Party plans to stabilize annual PR admissions at less than 1% of Canada's population and to cap temporary residents below 5% of the total Canadian population. Meaning that since Canada's population is 41.5 million, they want the total number of foreign workers and international students to be below 2.075 million, and would offer permanent residency to a maximum of 415,000 people annually. As of now, temporary residents make up 7.27% of Canada's population, 2.27% higher than the target, and PR is being offered to 395,000 individuals annually, meaning it's already within that target. Poilievre, on the other hand, has mentioned on multiple occasions that the immigration numbers would be lower if he were to become Prime Minister, without getting into specifics. These targets are about the permanent and temporary migrants, and do not include refugees or asylum seekers. Both parties have been critical of them, Poilievre more than Carney. At one of his campaign events, Poilievre stated that he was in favor of legal immigration, but if they're a fraudster, they'll have to go. Carney blames the increased influx of asylum seekers on Donald Trump's massive crackdown on migrants to the USA. He believes that Canada and the US should work more closely in collaboration to manage the situation. Immigration targets may be another decisive factor for Canadian voters, and as per his promise, Carney must work with the US. However, when it comes to another decisive factor, he'll kind of have to deal with the US. Number 3. Tariffs. Canada and the US are two of the best friends and large trading partners for each other. 76.8% of Canadian exports go to the US, which means the US is in a position where it could completely dominate Canada. We've made a separate video on that. You can check it from the link in the description afterwards. Despite Canada relying so much on the US, everything had been just fine throughout history, but as Donald Trump promised before officially becoming president, the US has imposed tariffs on Canada, hurting the Canadian people and economy.
Three different sets of U.S. tariffs remain in place and will continue to pose significant threats to Canadian workers and Canadian businesses.
Both parties had discussed their approaches to fighting U.S. tariffs before elections and kept sharing their thoughts even after the elections. Carney believes in counter-tariffs and has thus put 25% tariffs on automobiles coming into Canada through the U.S. From all countries except the U.S. and Canada, Carney has imposed another 25% tariffs on several other American products such as steel, aluminium, orange juice, peanut butter, wine, spirits, beer, coffee, appliances, apparel, footwear, motorcycles, cosmetics, and certain paper products. Poilievre doesn't disagree with counter-tariffs but is more selective than Carney. He wants to ensure that the tariffs do not affect Canadians. Instead, they should affect American companies only.
That means targeting U.S. products that A, we can do without, B, we can buy elsewhere, or C, best of all, that we can make here at home.
He also wants the tariff money to go back to the Canadian people in the form of tax cuts so that common citizens aren't affected. It's also worth noting that Poilievre has been asking for strict border control and severe punishments for illegal fentanyl or human trafficking, something that was the claimed justification for the US imposing tariffs on Canada. So it is likely that if Poilievre had won the elections, he would have taken less time to convince Trump against tariffs. However, because of Carney's experience as an economist, many Canadians preferred him over Poilievre specifically for fighting Trump. In some aspects, Carney seemed to be a better choice, whereas in other aspects, Poilievre took the lead. Canadian citizens have looked into the goods and bads of both sides and then elected Mark Carney to be their prime minister. This brings us to what the future holds for Canada. By winning the 2025 elections, the Liberal Party remains in charge, but things might be better than they were during Trudeau's time. Even though it is still the Liberal Party, it's under Mark Carney. He's the new prime minister with new visions, new policies, and a new cabinet, all of which represent change. Or maybe it's still the same. Yes, Carney is an outsider who had no experience in elected office and is coming in as a former governor of the Bank of Canada and Bank of England. But it's not just him who's in the government. Most of his cabinet members are the same as Trudeau's. Take Chrystia Freeland, for example, Trudeau's finance minister, who was held accountable for most of the terrible economic decisions taken during the last government. A lot of people believe that most of Trudeau's policies were actually Freeland's policies, but somehow she's back, this time as transport minister.
And how does Chrystia Freeland convince Liberals that she represents change, given that she has been, as Justin Trudeau said at his farewell press conference, the closest person he worked with for the last 10 years?
And the answer is, we don't know. Let's take Sean Fraser as another example, who, in the words of Poilievre,
was the immigration minister who caused the immigration crisis, the housing minister who gave us the housing crisis.
He's also back as the Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Canada. Now, I can keep naming more and more failed ministers that are back in the cabinet, but you probably get the point already. So let's move ahead. Carney might not be the best leader Canada could ask for, but is he going to be better than Trudeau? Yes, we must keep in mind that Carney is an economist with high achievements, so it's very likely that he'll find a way through the recent economic failures of Canada. After all, one of the reasons behind his being elected was Donald Trump, as people trusted him over Poilievre for convincing Trump to take back those tariffs. Also, Canadians chose Carney over Poilievre not just for economic reasons, but also for other political reasons. Poilievre and his Conservative Party laid out proposal after proposal targeting men, mostly the young and working class, and didn't focus enough on female voters. As a result, many Canadian women voted against him. More than 4% of the Canadian population identifies as part of the LGBTQIA+, and since Canada is the most friendly country to its sexual minorities, there would be a very large number of allies. And they wouldn't want a prime minister who says this.
Well, I'm not aware of any other genders than men and women. I mean, if you have any other that you want me to consider, you're welcome to tell me right now.
Many Canadians voted against Poilievre because of his political values, but was that economically a good decision? Well, that's for you to decide. Now that Canada has already elected Mark Carney, let's just hope that he turns out to be a good leader and brings Canada to its economic glory. Before we end the video, share with us your thoughts on Canada's future. Do you think Canada will rise under Carney, or did Canadians mess up by not choosing Poilievre? Comment below and don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to stay tuned.